August 21st, 1955. Christian County, Kentucky. A hot Sunday night in a rural community called Kelly, just outside Hopkinsville. There was nothing unusual about the evening. Families were visiting and talking, children were playing, and then, just after dark, a man stepped outside to get some water. What he saw in the sky would turn an ordinary farmhouse into one of the most famous alleged alien encounter sites in American history. There was a strange object, a group of terrified witnesses, small creatures with enormous eyes, a farmhouse surrounded for hours, and gunfire. Lots of gunfire. Tonight on Midwest Shadow Files, we're going to Kelly, Kentucky, and we're opening the file on the Kelly-Hopkinsville Encounter. Back to Midwest Shadow Files. I'm Dan, your host and Midwest Shadow Files storyteller. Kentucky is one of those outlier states. In my opinion, you look at the map of what we are considering the Midwest states, 12 of them, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Kansas making the Great Plains portions of the Midwest. Then you have Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. And then you have Kentucky, as far south as Illinois, and as far east as Ohio, and yet it's considered part of the South. Now, whether you consider Kentucky in that grouping or not really doesn't matter. I think I'll include Kentucky with our stories moving forward, but for tonight's episode, it's tied to our story we had on Monday, covering the story of Evansville, Indiana, with the green-clawed monster of the Ohio River. And this is important to note because where this takes place is very close to where the green-clawed beast or monster event happened. And within a short period of time, actually on the exact same day. So for that reason, paranormal enthusiasts have often tied these stories together, and it's a fascinating story. Our story begins in the community of Kelly, which sits in Christian County, a short distance from Hopkinsville, and on the evening of August 21st, 1955, several members of the Sutton and Taylor families were gathered at a farmhouse. They were visiting, talking, and spending an ordinary summer evening together, and among them was Billy Ray Taylor, who was visiting the Sutton family with his wife, June. According to the later accounts, Taylor stepped outside sometime after dark to get water from a well, and that's when he looked up. Taylor later said he saw a bright object moving through the sky. He described it as a strange, glowing craft. It reportedly moved toward the area behind the farmhouse and disappeared from view. Taylor rushed back inside. He told others that he had seen a flying saucer, and at first, they didn't believe him. And who could blame them? It's 1955. The country is in the middle of flying saucer fever. It's everywhere. But a flying saucer in your backyard? That's something else entirely. Eventually, the family began hearing strange noises outside, and then something appeared near the farmhouse. According to the witnesses, it was small, roughly 3 to 4 feet tall, with a large head, long arms, thin legs, and huge glowing eyes. One of the creatures approached the house. The witnesses became terrified, and then one of the men fired a gun. The family grabbed their guns, opened fire with rifles, shotguns at the figures outside, but the creatures didn't behave like ordinary animals. According to the witnesses, bullets seemed to have little or no effect. The figures would appear, then disappear. Then they would peer through the windows, approach the door, try to open them, then retreat back into the darkness. Again and again. But it wasn't a battle that took place over a couple of minutes. It was a standoff that lasted nearly 4 hours. An alien invasion. More right after this. Hey there, Dan here. I wanted to quickly share again what we have coming up next week. The first one takes us back up into Michigan and surrounds itself with the story of two classic tales, witches and wolves. And in this story, we get to combine the two and look at witchy wolves. It's a fascinating story that dates back a couple hundred years, but has a little connection to skinwalkers, or at least I feel it does. We'll dive into that one on Monday, and then on Wednesday, we travel back to the wonderful and crazy city of Chicago, Illinois, and wind the clock back to 1915 and tell the story of the SS Eastland disaster on the Chicago River. The tragedy was one of the worst in the city, where a boat taking an afternoon trip to Michigan City rolled over from being overweight, killing 844 passengers and crew. Not only that, but years later, the area around this part of the Chicago River, along the Riverwalk, and several of its buildings are known to be haunted and possibly connected to the Eastland tragedy. We'll tell the story, we'll ask the questions, and we hope you get the opportunity to follow along. But for now, let's get back to today's episode and the rest of the story. The descriptions are what made the Kelly-Hopkinsville story famous. The beings were said to have enormous eyes, pointed ears, long arms, hands with claw-like fingers, and a strange, almost floating way of moving. One of the most disturbing details was that they seemed completely fearless. Imagine sitting inside a farmhouse with a loaded rifle. You've already fired at something outside, and then you see two huge eyes staring at you through the window. You fire. The figure disappears. You wait, nothing. Then suddenly, there it is again. But this time, at another window. Like a relentless attack again and again. And that's the kind of night the witnesses described. A siege. Except attackers weren't trying to break through the doors. They seemed to be watching, waiting, testing the people inside. And eventually the family decided they had enough. And around 11 p.m., several of the frightened witnesses drove to the Hopkinsville police station. And what the officers saw was reportedly remarkable. The people were terrified. Their story was that strange creatures were attacking their farmhouse and that they'd been fighting off all of them with gunfire for hours. Police took the report seriously enough to investigate. And after all gunshots were indeed fired, something was definitely going on. So officers from Hopkinsville and Christian County responded. Kentucky State Police were involved. And supposedly military police from nearby Fort Campbell also went to the farmhouse. This wasn't simply a group of people telling a strange story around a kitchen table anymore. Now, law enforcement was standing at the scene. When officers arrived, they searched the property. They found evidence that there had been shooting. There were damaged screens and lots of bullet holes. But there were no creatures, no bodies, no spacecraft, no physical remains of anything that couldn't be identified, and the officers searched the surrounding area and found nothing. The strange visitors were gone, or at least that's what it looked like. According to the family's account, the creatures returned after the officers left, around 3:30 in the morning. And that's when they finally abandoned the farmhouse. They packed up and left, gone. And really, could you blame them? By morning, the story was already becoming something much bigger than a frightening night on a Kentucky farm. The newspapers got a hold of it. And then came the headline that immortalized the story. Story of a spaceship with 12 little green men. And soon the world had a new UFO mystery. There's an important detail here. The creatures weren't originally described by the witnesses as little green men. That phrase became attached to the story later. Some early accounts described the beings as silvery or metallic, but newspapers and popular culture gradually transformed them into something more familiar. Little green men. And the phrase stuck, really stuck. Even if you are joking around or telling alien stories today around a campfire, people will joke around by saying, I saw something. But it's not like I saw little green men or anything. Little green men. a term we probably all know. But the witnesses may have been describing something completely different. So what actually happened? The mystery continues. Earlier, we had an account of some creature grabbing someone in the Ohio River, and on the same day, just across the river, you have what is being reported by witnesses as an alien invasion of sorts. There are several possibilities. One explanation involves owls. I know it seems like a stretch, but hear the explanation. There is a theory that great horned owls could potentially explain some of the descriptions. They are nocturnal. They have large reflective eyes. They can move almost silently, and if someone was already frightened and expecting something strange outside, a large owl appearing near a window could look very different in the darkness. Another possibility is a meteor, or another bright astronomical object. Again, another stretch, but the theory exists. Taylor's initial sighting of a strange light could have been completely unrelated to what happened later. And as always, there are psychological explanations. A group of people experience something frightening together can reinforce one another's perception. One person sees something. Someone else reacts. The first person's belief becomes stronger, and soon everyone is looking for the same thing. But there's another side to the story. The witnesses stuck with it for decades. The story never went away. Some descendants later defended the family's account, and local historians have continued to treat the encounter as an important part of Kelly's history. The United States Air Force was interested in UFO reports during this period. If you have ever had a chance to listen to my past episode on the Gorman dogfight over the skies of Fargo, North Dakota, you'll hear me tell the story of something called Project Blue Book. The investigation eventually became part of the larger UFO mythology surrounding Project Blue Book. But no extraterrestrial evidence was recovered from the Kelly farmhouse. No creature was captured. Like I said before, no spacecraft was found. No biological evidence emerged, and the case remained exactly what it had been from the beginning, a collection of eyewitness accounts. And this is significant because Project Blue Book officially classified the event as a hoax. And while I'm not a conspiracy podcast, there are plenty of stories to go along with government cover-ups regarding events like this, like the Gorman dogfight, which a World War II trained pilot engaged in a dogfight with a UFO, and they labeled it a weather balloon. So for me, the fact that Project Blue Book labeled the Kelly-Hopkinsville Encounter a hoax is highly suspect. Maybe it was. But then again, maybe in fact, it was a massive cover-up. And along with the green-clawed monster of the Ohio, remember the story of the military personnel who came over and interviewed the victim? They told her to never tell anyone of the event again. Case closed. So eyewitness accounts only, but extremely strange eyewitness accounts. We don't really know whatever happened, but here's what has always fascinated me about the Kelly-Hopkinsville event. The witnesses didn't report seeing the creatures once. They said the things kept coming back for hours. And they were reportedly shot at. They disappeared. They returned. They looked through their windows and they never fully left, returning to the house later that morning at 3 a.m. And they kept the entire group terrified until the family finally fled. If the story is true, why didn't the creatures simply leave? Why weren't they afraid of gunfire? What were they doing there? Were they hostile, curious, lost, or were they never there at all? And perhaps the biggest question, why did so many people believe they were seeing the same thing? Nearly 70 years later, Kelly still remembers the night. The story became part of the community's identity, and the town has even embraced the legend with its annual Little Green Men Days. Now, I find that fascinating because other towns across the nation have done the same thing, with Point Pleasant and the Mothman to the Van Meter Visitor in Van Meter, Iowa. Making light of something, celebrating something, but even a way for a town to cope and just deal with past stories that are so mysterious that they still have questions today. What began as a frightening report in 1955 eventually became folklore. And perhaps that's the real legacy of Kelly-Hopkinsville, not proof of aliens or monsters, but proof of how quickly a strange night can become a legend. One witness tells a story, a newspaper prints the story, a headline gives the creatures a name, and suddenly, a few hours on a Kentucky farm becomes a mystery that lasts for generations. Maybe it was an owl, but maybe it was something else entirely. Something nobody could identify. Something that came out of the darkness and refused to leave. We may never know. But if you ever find yourself driving through western Kentucky after dark, and you see something strange moving beside the road, don't assume it's a deer. Don't assume it's a person, and definitely don't assume it's alone. This episode was written, recorded, and produced by me, myself, and I. This is Dan, your host, and your Midwest Shadow Files storyteller. And this is Midwest Shadow Files.